All right, welcome back to another segment of H&R Talk, hosted by yours truly,
Henry.
and let's get started. All right, so what we're going to be talking about today is compulsory voting. Right, and compulsory voting is the idea that people are mandated by the government to vote, and the idea is that it increases voter turnout, which increases the government's responsiveness, and in return, their I guess appeal to the people, which would because at the state that politics is right now, a lot of people aren't very satisfied, right? And so there are pros and cons. One of the pros is, as I said, increased voter turnout because in America, we had one of the lowest turnouts compared to other Western civilizations, right? We had a around 48% for our last or for our last election, which is a little scary for the democracy that's supposed to be majority rules, right? And so another one is that if people are mandated to vote, people will be more interested in politics. They'll become Politics will become better, which is a really good thing because people today aren't the most interested in politics. And but there are some cons to it. Um, Government forcing people to vote isn't necessarily well received by people, especially in the state that America is right now. Another con is that it does cost money. A lot of people, though they don't have a lot of access to voting, which would cost more money to implement. And there's a lot of ordeals that people would have to go through when a lot of people don't find it necessary or find it a hurdle. But It's becoming more and more a topic if we look to Australia, one of the countries that mandate voting. They have a 91% voter turnout. They incentivize people with hot dogs to vote. They put it on a Sunday or Saturday. More people can do it, and a lot of the things that we have in America restrict people from voting, like having voting on a Tuesday. I mean, of all days, right? You have to have ID, renewal of the ID. You have to pay a fee, and you have to have like a long time, a long wait. So it's an idea that's popping up more and more frequently. What's your take on it, Henry?
Well, I mean, when it comes to this whole concept of pushing people to vote, if it guarantees more voter turnout and the fact that the whole point of American ideals in fighting for our freedoms is for people to use those freedoms, and those freedoms aren't being used, I feel like it should be prompted by the government to uh to incentivize people to vote more, as well as it might help uh get give voices to communities that have been neglected in the past. But what can some of the cons be for pushing such an initiative?
Right. Another con that I didn't mention is if more people vote, but people don't take the time to think about their vote, you get a lot of just random votes, which could skew the results of the election, which could be very harmful, right? Another con is that it will take money, and a lot of people aren't really willing to spend that money on voting. I mean, people also won't take very well to the government forcing them to vote, since it's not what's been socially accepted. So those are some of the cons, but I do feel like there's ways around the cons, right? Um, you maybe don't force it, right? You slowly make it easier, more accessible. You make it more, I don't want to say entertaining, but more acceptable to people, right? That, hey, voting is a thing that we should do because we're in a democracy, and that is almost like our right to the government to make it to make their gov to make the country better for us, right? What do you think about the cons?
Well, I mean, there is a lot of things to implement it on an instant basis, and I would probably say that most of America would prefer a more gradual and slower approach as they do for a lot of things. Uh, and those gradual approaches can start with like things such as, moving the date, creating more polling locations, incentivizing people to vote in other circumstances and whatnot. But my question is, with a higher turnout, how will that affect the political map and climate of America?
That's a good question. It's actually an interesting one, right? Um, I believe President Trump said it. He said that if everybody voted, that no Republican would be voted in for presidency because the Republican platform, right, which is their ideas, their ideals, their goals, is not is more outdated per se to the upcoming people, right? Because their platforms don't really align with the poor, the young, some minority groups, which are a lot of the people that aren't voting. So if everybody voted, they would be forced to change their platform, which could change the Democrats, which could change a lot of things. But I believe it would be for the better, right?
Well, if that is the case, then wouldn't that push these political parties to reframe their ideals? Because in the past, they've done the same thing across history. Democrats and Republicans have switched and kind of reframed their ideals to model their ideal voters and their ideal supporters. Uh, so, if that scenario in which all of these groups, which have been previously not been uh, pushed to vote or have not really thought their vote is important, start out turning out and voting, I feel like that would just pressure politicians to really just reframe their ideals to gather more people into their ideal group of supporters.
Yeah, yeah. As I said, like as more people are voting, right? There's more people that you have to convince to support you, right? Which means you'd have to change some of your platform to involve them in their goals and their ideas, right? Which would have an interesting change on the political landscape. Maybe we see more third party groups instead of just Republicans and Democrats start making a boom, right? Because um, if Republicans are pushed to become more progressive, then so too are the Democrats to distinguish themselves, right? Which could lead to the rise of maybe older ones, more conservative, even more conservative, or maybe even more progressive. And that could change not only the U.S. but a lot of different political schemes. As if the U.S. makes a big change, that would definitely affect a lot of other democracies, right?
I mean, yes, the US is widely regarded on the global map as probably the biggest star on the stage, and so people pay attention to a lot of things that we do, which usually makes us shine as a beacon of democracy, a great military, great economy, but could also weak, but also can shows and showcases some of our weaknesses, our racial divides, on how we police and whatnot, those kinds of issues that have been kind of dragged on for centuries, for decades. Um, but what I'm really interested in is the fact of what you said for political parties and how conservative and progressive ideals kind of shift power. And I've honestly thought in my mind, is conservatism something that no longer should be a part of our political system for now? Not like forever, for now, because I see it more of as a power, as a balancing act. You see, front between like in the Great Depression and World War II, we had a very progressive president who put in a lot of social programs to help America. That was very progressive, that was a very progressive stance. And then towards the communist towards the Cold War, we had a lot of conservative presidents that really pushed like that anti-communist rhetoric and kind of pressed America as a superpower that just defies everything Russia's against. And there's always that power shift and balance, and America's political climate keeps showing that. And I honestly could say that there's moments where you need more progressivism over a long period of time, and then you need conservatism to just cap that off so you don't go too far. And then again, that power balance will go one and then two and then three and then four. You know how that so it just you keep on a consistent wave of meeting these results, but kind of holding it back to an extent where the government doesn't become too oppressive and too powerful.
Right, right. Yeah, and that reminds me of one of Mr. Westcott's lessons, right? Where it's
Hmm.
like conservatism is it's sort of like it's like holding the past, right? It's sort of like tying us back to our past, right? It's the idea of like very traditional, what has worked works, right? Whereas more like progressive ideas, like they're the ones that are pushing us forward, right? But neither is exactly good, right? If you go too far forward, then you are like forgetting the ideas of the past, you're forgetting the conditions of the present, and you're just looking towards the future, right? But
Hmm.
if you're only holding the past, what has worked only works, right? You're not getting that improvement, you're not adapting. So it's really that balance, but it's about how much balance, right? Maybe is it 50-50, 30-70? And that's a really hard question to answer. I mean, you might even say it's impossible, but it's something that we should explore because democracy in America is really young. We don't have any like uh, previous democracies to look at, right? And say, oh, they did this, so maybe we should do this, right? And so we're sort of like that leading stride in democracy, and we should hold a good example for others, right? That's my 2 cents on it.
Um, some great insight, and I have to agree with you. Any other comments?
I don't know. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what other people have, what other people think on this, because this is a topic that'll only continue to develop. And well, guys, thank you for listening in. Be sure to like and subscribe, and tell us your thoughts down below. What are your opinions on either side? All right, out.